As you listen to my story, you'll start picking up this wrestling motif. So I'm wrestling with a question that is, we're not reaching the lost. We were seeing people come to Christ, but we lived in a community that was 98% unsaved, and that's being generous. I mean, I did the math one time, and I took every attendee at every church, regardless of if they were even slightly Christian, regardless of the denomination, rolled them up, and it came out to less than 2% of the population. And I realized, how are we going to reach these people? And so we tried the traditional things. We had community Bible studies, we had outreach meetings, we started a Christian school, we did door knocking, we did all the things that churches do to try to reach their community. And again, it bore fruit, but it was slow. It was painstaking. It just didn't seem to be keeping up even with the population growth. And so I began to wrestle with this, and I was out in the community, and I was meeting with a business guy, and I've shared the gospel with him, and he said something that just was like a punch in the head. He said, I expect that you would tell me that Jesus is the answer because that's your job. And it was a great moment and a terrible moment all at once, because I realized his view, and it's a pretty common view, is that the pastor, the formal pastor in today's world, is a professional Christian. Now, I wasn't that. I didn't think to be that, and I'm not accusing anybody of being that, but that was his view. And I think it was pretty accurate as far as the general worldview of the lost, looking at the church and looking at the leaders of the church, say, well, you do that because they pay you. And so it really set me to praying, Lord, how am I going to reach these people? How am I going to reach outside the four walls of the church? How am I going to reach out into the community with a relationship and message that is relevant? And after about a year of praying, the Lord said very clearly, become one of them. What? What do you mean become one of them? And of course, he didn't mean become a pagan, but what he meant was, and I began to realize this, what he meant was leave the formal pastorate, and I want you to become a business person. I want you to start a business and live among them. And I thought, no, I can't do that. I don't have a marketable skill, and that's just not right. I was kind of a miniature version of Moses, arguing with God, which of course is really stupid. But I did. And finally, after this went on for, maybe a month, the Lord just kind of stepped in his way and said, that's what I did. And that was the end of the argument. The Son of God, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And we beheld his glory. The glory of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. In other words, Jesus became a man. The Word became a man. The Son of God became human, lived among us, so that he could redeem us, so that he could save us. And like when the Lord said that, okay, Lord, if you can do that, then I can certainly leave the formal pastorate and go into the business world and see what you will do. The other thing, by the way, that I didn't realize that I had a marketable skill. I thought I'm trained for, an undergrad in history and a couple of years in missionary training school. What marketable skill do I actually have for the business world? And I say this because I know there are a lot of people that wonder, and this is what God showed me. He said, look, for years now, 9 years altogether, you've been taking, no longer than that, you've been taking vast amounts of complex information and distilling those into a succinct format, a succinct message, and presenting it to people in the way they can understand and apply in their own lives. That is a marketable skill. So I ended up starting a corporate training company back in the day. This is back in the early 80s, and have been involved in corporate training, human resource development, culture building, leader development, all of that stuff pretty much ever since. And so, but here's what I loved about it. When I left the formal pastorate and got into the, quote, the world, two things happened. One, a lot of my Christian friends, and particularly I'd gone on to seminary during that time, a lot of my seminary buddies and even professors automatically assumed I had gone shipwreck. I had lost my faith. I had left the way, and they called me and they wanted to know, what are you doing? Have you lost your way? And of course, when I would tell them the story, thankfully, they would relax, and they began over time to affirm me. Only one actually did in the beginning, but over time, more and more would say, okay, we think we understand what you're doing. You actually have followed Jesus into the business world in order to be a light in the darkness for those who will never set foot in an evangelical setting. So that's the first thing that happened. The second thing that happened is the desire in my heart began to happen. I began to be able to have gospel conversations with the lost all over the world. I had one client in particular that sent me to 5 countries, and in Canada and the US and England and Germany and France. I began to have gospel conversations with unbelievers, people I would have never, ever met. And they were open to the gospel because it was not some religious figure, some preacher guy sharing some message. It was one of them, a business person, sharing his life, sharing his answers that worked for him.